Well, early this week, Israeli fighter jets launched missiles at the Iranian consulate in Damascus, killing several senior military officers there. And Tehran has now vowed to retaliate. Let's now get the latest with our correspondent, Alex Cadier, who's joining us from Tel Aviv. Alex, a very good afternoon to you. Look, why is Israel increasingly attacking targets in Syria?
Well, certainly that single strike, which has been widely attributed, as you said, to Israel, was one that has caused real concern for regional escalation. We know that Iran-backed militias like Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and some other Shiite militias in Iraq have been firing rockets and drones into northern Israel in particular. One drone reaching all the way to the southern tip of Israel in the town of Eilat, and that is why the Israelis say they have had to retaliate. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard general who was killed in that strike, as well as his colleagues and other Iranian officers, were in charge of Iran's relationships in Lebanon and Syria, and therefore very much a commander leading Hezbollah, which has been firing rockets into Israel. So that is the justification for the Israelis behind that strike. Also because a very large part of northern Israel remains entirely evacuated, with thousands of people having had to move south and be displaced to other parts of the country to remain safe. But clearly there is a real concern that this strike against the Iranian general and the retaliation, however it may come and whatever it may be, by Iran, could really lead to not just escalation but all-out war in the north of Israel.
Alex, let's talk about how a likely further escalation in the hostilities is. Taking into cognizance, of course, what Iran could obviously do in terms of retaliation.
Well, there's a real fear of that happening, and the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, just yesterday had to tell Israelis not to bulk buy generators, water, not to get as much cash out as possible, the kind of panicking that you see when a war or a possible escalation is looming. So clearly the Israeli authorities are concerned. We know that they have also cancelled the weekend leave for most of the Israeli Defense Forces. They've called more reservists up. They've also strengthened Israel's air defenses, and you can see just in the last couple of hours, I'm looking now at the alert system that you have in Israel, and just in the last few hours you have rocket alerts across northern Israel and one drone having to be shot down by Israeli forces. So there is a real sense that this could absolutely explode into a bigger conflict. Now, we know the United States has said it had nothing to do with that strike in Damascus, and we also know the United States and Iran have been in discussions to prevent any escalation, but certainly here in Israel it feels looming, and it certainly will bring a lot of nervousness to the people of Israel and the whole region.
Now, talk to us about what this attack could possibly mean for the geopolitical landscape out in the Middle East, Alex.
Well, certainly it's going to be a continued increase in tension between Iran and Israel. We know that there has been a proxy war through smaller groups between the two, and there's a real concern that this could have an impact for Jordan, for Syria, for the countries around, and an all-out war between Iranian proxies or even Iran directly in Israel could have dramatic consequences. And it's certainly something Israel's allies are working very hard to avoid. We know Tehran has vowed to make Israel pay, to get revenge, and so we don't know exactly how that might look like, but it could have a hugely destabilizing effect, particularly as we know the diplomatic efforts to bring a ceasefire to the fighting in Gaza are ongoing. We know that there are a lot of efforts, and there have been efforts since the start of this war, since the attacks on October 7th, to avoid an escalation, but certainly this strike and the Iranian response may bring the risk of that escalation much, much higher.
Look, speaking of Israel and its allies, Alex, with the latest UN resolution, they're calling for that ban on military aid or sales to Israel, with the UAE also having reportedly announced its cessation of diplomatic ties with Israel. Do you think this is going to have any impact in terms of how Israel is actually going to conduct itself, as this war rages on out in Gaza?
In a word, no. That the United Nations Human Rights Council resolution will not really have an impact on Israeli policy. The Israelis have been very clear. They see the UN as having abandoned Israel and supported Hamas. So you can expect little reaction or little change simply because of that resolution. I would also add that the UAE have had to clarify that they'd not cut diplomatic ties with Israel. But what will change things, what will make things change, is American pressure. We've seen that in the last day. We've seen that phone call between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Joe Biden giving the Israeli Prime Minister effectively an ultimatum saying, if you do not improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, if you do not let more aid flow in, American support, both weapons and military support, but diplomatic support at the United Nations, well, that American support could diminish, could weaken, could be conditioned. And so we've seen this announcement by the Israeli government saying they will open the Erez checkpoint. That's on the northern end of Gaza. They will open the port of Ashdod, right next, about 40 kilometers from Gaza, that port, to allow humanitarian supplies in. They will allow more supplies through the Kerem Shalom crossing in the south of Gaza. The United States has said they welcome those announcements of more aid being allowed in, but they want to see not just announcements, but results in the humanitarian situation in Gaza.
Absolutely. And very quickly, Alex, I mean, we understand that there's reports indicating that about 28 Israeli embassies around the world are actually closed today amid fears of that Iranian reprisal. But let's also talk about, as the month of Ramadan actually draws to a close, we know that a lot of Palestinians had hoped, in fact, for, some progress in those ceasefire talks, or at least a speedy resolution as to the current ongoing war in Gaza. But, I mean, what is the status now around the mosque? We understand that during the holy month, there was heavy security that was around the mosque. What is the status now? What can you tell us about how that has fed out during the month of the holy prayer sessions?
Well, it's still incredibly tense. Jerusalem is always, during Ramadan, a city on edge. Thousands of police officers, Israeli border police and local police officers, have been placed in the old city of Jerusalem on the last Friday prayers of the holy month of Ramadan. That will be very tense. We've seen scuffles between police officers and worshippers trying to get to the mosque. We've seen tear gas used on one occasion, and the real concern is that there could be a flashpoint. There could be more tensions, clashes, or possibly worse in the city of Jerusalem. So certainly that flashpoint, that mosque on this last Friday prayers could be a very, very tense place indeed. And you're right to say that those embassies, 28 embassies, have been shut around the world because of the fear of retaliation, because of that increased tension. Certainly the city of Jerusalem, because of its profound religious significance for Muslims and for Jewish people, remains a very, very tense city, and always has the risk of being a powder keg. So it's something we'll have to monitor very closely for the coming hours and days.
Thank you so much for that, Alex Cadier in Tel Aviv for us.